Welcome to Guns 101, our welcome video message for new gun owners brought to you by the Self-Defense Radio Network. I'm Rob Morse from Self-Defense Gun Stories. My partners are Amanda Suffolcool from Eye on the Target Radio, and the guy behind the curtain doing the heavy lifting is Paul Lathrop from the Polite Society podcast. We're very lucky to have a friend and one of my firearms instructors, Brian Hill, with us from the Complete Combatant. Brian, people hear all this sort of jargon when they got a new gun. Millions of them brought a gun home. It's in the box. They haven't had a chance to get into classes because of quarantine. One of the basic rules is don't point the gun at things you don't want to destroy. We call that muzzle discipline. Tell us the rest of the story.
You know, it's an interesting thing with muzzle discipline. It seems like a very simple rule. Don't point a gun at anything you don't want to destroy. But as a firearms instructor myself, I have to say that it's the rule that's broken the most. I see a tremendous problem with muzzle discipline. And it's not where people think the problem is. They tend to be careful and not to point it at each other when they're conscious of it. But muzzle discipline is really what we call the awareness or the attention cycle. If the end of the firearm had an eye in it, it was looking, that's where you would be seeing. And that part of your sense at the end of the firearm is where it's pointing. You have to understand what that's happening. But what happens for a lot of people is I wouldn't point it at anybody else, but they tend to point it at themselves. They don't realize it. Their other hand gets in front of it. I have a SIRT pistol here. Sometimes their hand will cross in front of it. That's still pointing its gun at something you're not wanting to destroy. I saw a young lady at Cabela's explain that when she dry practices, she puts her hand in front of the muzzle because that's how her dad taught her to do it. So she has information from a trusted advisor as if her hand would catch the bullet, you know, and would make it safe. This is a bad habit. And it was interesting and it was enlightening to me because it wasn't the same process that I would ever utter in my life. When we go to holster, we have a new holster, the other hand wants to come help. And what happens a lot of times is the muzzle covers it. It's very easy to do that. If we're at a shooting range and there's somebody next to us and we go to reload it, most people turn it so they can see it. And once you turn a firearm like this SIRT pistol that way, it's pointed at the person beside you. So you're also muzzling them in that way. And interestingly enough, in the gun classes, the biggest problem I see is people are very disciplined with their own muzzle, but they'll bend over and put their head in front of somebody else's to pick up something off the ground. That's a problem. It doesn't occur to them that they're muzzling themselves with somebody else's firearm. So this idea of muzzle discipline is don't point that gun in any direction, including at yourself, at other people, and property you don't want to destroy. There's Masad Ayub tells a great story in his class about, people dry practicing, shooting their TV or shooting into their car, because they didn't have a safe direction. Like, this is my room where I practice. This wall over here is the best dry practice wall in the world because it's underground. So it's sheetrock and it's underground, and then nobody can see it. So the muzzle discipline thing, make sure that the gun is always pointed in the correct direction. Make sure that your hand doesn't go in front of it. And if you have to do something with it, be very careful of that front end. And then be aware of other people actually walking in front of you. Be able to turn it up or push it down. And that way you'll know that you're pointing it in a safe direction. It's a very highly complicated sort of thing when we say muzzle discipline, but there are two rules that rule them all, and muzzle discipline is one of them. Which way is the gun pointing? If you had what we call an unintentional discharge and it was pointed in a safe direction, everything would be fine.
And one of the things that I see in a lot of students is they point it because they don't want to point it at anything else. So they point it down and then they point it at their own feet or their own leg. Yep. And so trying to tell people that sometimes the safest direction is down, but it's down and about 3 foot in front of you. So it's not in front of you, someone else is not in that space, but really working on that overall awareness and doing it while you're holding a real gun, whether you're holding a pretend gun, your SIRT pistol, anything, because what you get comfortable with is what you'll do. Mm-hmm. And so keeping that habit all the time is absolutely critical. to new shooters and to experienced shooters. I mean, have you seen that in other places? And
well, here's an interesting tidbit. One of the shotgun accessory manufacturers makes a piece that goes on your shoe to rest the barrel on the shotgun. What a horrible idea to put a shotgun pointing at your foot. I know it's supposed to be unloaded, but it is a piece that actually cups on the top of your foot and holds the barrel of the shotgun. You're pointing it at your foot,
And I have been at a range where that went bad.
Mm-hmm.
With the absolute worst expected outcome. And it is not, it's a horrible idea.
If you're working with a holster, that's the biggest problem, because whether I'm an appendix guy and I teach that, but I also teach strong side, which means it's on your hip. Appendix means it's in the front. And a lot of people say, I would never carry a gun in front because, oh my God, what would you shoot? But I watch them just as easily point that gun in at an angle to their hip and try to find the holster. A trans hip shot is just as bad as shooting yourself in the groin. You have a lot of problems from that. So having some sort of laser or a flashlight with a narrow beam, and you just kind of move it around and think about how you move that gun, it starts giving you that idea of where it's pointing. It's a lot easier with long guns because we can see them out there. Mm-hmm. But with pistols, it's easy to do it. And mostly it's the other hand. Their hand tends to get in front of them. And I see it a lot at the range when they're walking and they point it down and their feet are coming in front of it every other step. So you've got to be incredibly careful of it. It is the hardest rule because it's a constant rule. And all of us in our life have forgotten to turn the coffee pot off or left the garage door open. We have moments of unintentional blindness where we just don't pay attention to what's going on. And it just takes a second like that for an incredible accident to happen. So wherever this is pointing, it needs to be in a safe direction. And that can change through the environment. I live in a 3-story house, so sometimes up's okay, sometimes down's okay. So I have to think about all those people around me. Then I have neighbors in each direction, which is a safe direction to point that firearm. That is a contextual problem. And a lot of times we solve it at the range by saying you can only point it at the berm, which makes them pretty decent at the range, but not very good with living with the firearm.
Oh, and that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So figuring out your lifestyle, your house, and where the safe direction is makes a lot of sense. If you are someplace like you are, but you don't have a basement that's underground, and you have neighbors that are somewhat close. I mean, when you say bullet close, it doesn't have to be real close. It's is in your house structurally the corner where the two walls and the floor come together. So that triangle is structurally the soundest, safest place if you don't know anything else about what's going on. So kind of keep that in mind, because that's where all of the parts of construction of your house come together. But for everybody, you have to stop and think about it. And you need to think about it before you pick it up, before you put the gun in your hand, or before you take it out of its holster, so that you know where it's going to be aimed and what you're going to be doing with it before you do it. It's not, hey, I got this, what am I going to do with it? It's a little bit advanced planning. That's kind of some of the keys of gun ownership. So Brian Hill, thecompletecombatant.com. So he's been doing some Guns 101 video with us. So look up the rest of them because you're going to like them all.